Good afternoon. I'm Tim Sheehan. I'm the Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association of New Mexico. We hope you've enjoyed the day so far today on a professional caregiver conference. We're really wrapping up today with some really exciting information. And I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Gary Rosenberg, who is the Director of UNM Center for Memory and Aging. They are an incredible organization in our state, and they have been doing lots of good things. And now they've just got an announcement of something even better, bigger and better. So we are really excited to have UNM as a partner with us. And again, thank them for sponsoring our research updates. So Dr. Rosenberg.
Hey, thank you, Tim. That was very nice of you to give that introduction. Well, this is a perfect time for me to be here because we have some exciting news that has a direct impact on all the Alzheimer care in New Mexico. So I'm just going to go start with my share screen and see if it works. I think I've got it. So I am representing the university, the Center for Memory and Aging. We're relatively new. For many years, I was the chair of the neurology department, and then the chancellor, Paul Roth, asked me if I would start a memory and aging center about 2015, and so we're a freestanding center at the medical school under the research aegis of Richard Larson, who's the chancellor of research. So we have, of course, the clinical care, the education, and you'll hear a lot about the research because we're pretty excited about that. There's 3 neurologists, myself, Janice Knoefel, and John Adair. John Adair is an expert in behavioral neurology. Janice Knoefel is the geriatrician, neurologist, really unique person. And because we're growing, we're trying to get a new faculty, high-level sort of person. The really exciting news is that through the state and the medical school, we're going to have a brand new building, which is actually quite close to our research building, which will be great, lots of parking. And that will house the Senior Health Center, the Movement Disorders Center, and our Memory and Aging Center. So that will be a really freestanding, unique building for aging care. We have had since 2016 an award from the NIH to study the vascular aspects of Alzheimer's disease, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And our new NIH grant, which just started in August, and we really are excited about that, is that we are now one of the newest kids on the block for the Alzheimer's disease research. Just to give you some idea of the consortium nature of these new studies, nobody can work alone anymore. So we've been part of this. This is our 5th year. We have over 100 patients we've been studying pretty intensively during that time. And we're in a very good group, University of California, San Francisco, Southern California. There, we got stuck down there in New Mexico, Rush, Kentucky, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and we're all sharing our data. It's a really well-coordinated project, basically run out of NIH with Harvard as the coordinating center. So this grant is to develop, basically the idea was to develop new treatments based on vascular disease. And as everybody's heard, there's a huge impact of vascular disease on Alzheimer's disease. So if we can control lifestyle, hypertension, diabetes, sleep apnea, there's a good chance we can bend the curve, as they say, Some people estimate we could reduce or slow down 40% of Alzheimer's disease if we could get vascular disease under control. So we're working in that area, and everybody is now sending their data that they've collected to the Mecca at Harvard, and it will all be analyzed, and other people have access to it. So it'll be a really big resource. And we're in our 5th year now, and we've heard that there's going to be a MarkVCID2, and we hope that we'll be able to continue doing that. So basically for this one, we do neuropsychological testing, MRI, imaging, very high level. We have one of the best centers in the country at the Mind Research Network. And we also are able to analyze Alzheimer proteins in the spinal fluid and the blood. And from that, we can get really a very good idea of what's going on in a person's central nervous system. But the big news, which is exciting to us, is there were 31 Alzheimer's centers. These were, none of them were in the mountain region, as I say, from Mexico to Canada. There was a big blank, and everything was on the coasts and a little bit in the middle. But they've now funded the center in Albuquerque, and will be able to be part of this group. This is the importance to New Mexico and to the Alzheimer's Association is if you're part of this group, you have access to new treatments, which they are all done as large, very large studies. And you have the latest information, and you'll hear some of that from Dr. Edelmeier right after me. So this is, to us, a major coup. And to have both the MarkVCID vascular component study and to have this study places us in a really unique situation. There's only a few other centers in the country that are at that stage. So what I just wanted to go through for a few minutes, the aims of our Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. It's called the ADRC. We're actually an exploratory center, which means 3 years instead of 5, and we have to renew it. So the first aim is to create aging infrastructure at the university, both campuses. This is South Campus, as we call it, and North Campus, the medical school. The new building will be a major part of that infrastructure, and we're in the process of recruiting a new high-level faculty person with experience in Alzheimer's centers. And as I mentioned, the new building will be a unique part of the state in terms of its ability to share information on all types of aging problems, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, on down the line. The second aim is actually to take our work out into the rural area. And I think this is one of the things that NIH was very excited about. We have a mobile MRI scanner. Well, we actually had 2. One of them is broken right now, but this mobile MRI scanner will allow us to work in the rural areas, and people will not have to drive 6 hours just to come in and see us and then go back. So we're going to start with the Zuni Pueblo as soon as the COVID clears. I hope that's soon. And also right next to it is the Acoma. So we will take our scanner out there, we'll scan the patients, we'll test them, probably hopefully be able to do some blood studies there, which means that we'll have access to a large population that has never been studied by Alzheimer's disease centers. So this will be a unique thing. And the third aim is to use our expertise that we've developed in the MarkVCID, the vascular program, to develop novel blood markers. We've just acquired a very sensitive, ultra-sensitive assay system called Quantarex. It's 1,000 times more sensitive than the other systems we were using. And it'll allow us to detect these Alzheimer proteins, particularly amyloid and tau, in the blood. This is going to be what people call a game changer, because now we won't have to do spinal taps or PET scanning. PET scanning is very expensive, very hard to do. Spinal taps are invasive. So we're looking forward to using this new equipment, the imaging, the analysis equipment, and the building of a large center. So that's basically what I wanted to get across to everybody today, that we're very excited about the new program, and we're very excited to be a partner with the Alzheimer's Association, because what we do is exactly what they need, and what they do is exactly what we need. So it's a mutually accessible program. Now I wanted to introduce our next speaker, who we're very fortunate to have here, Dr. Rebecca Edelmeier, who's the Alzheimer's Association Director of Scientific Engagement Research. She's a very busy person. She's coordinating all the scientific agendas for the Alzheimer's Association, the Central Association, and she works with over 75 Alzheimer's Center Association chapters. And because of that, she's very busy, and we're very fortunate to have her here to share with us that information. Dr. Edelmeier?
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosenberg, and it really is a pleasure to be here with you all today. I am just so excited to talk about some of the biggest things that are happening across the research field. I only have you for a short time, but did want to bring a few things to your attention that are happening not only in New Mexico, but also across many different institutions around the country and around the world. And we thought today that we would give you really a landscape of Alzheimer's and dementia science. I know many of you are very familiar with this already, so we're not going to dive too deep into a lot of the basics, but certainly if you have any questions, please let me know in that chat function. We'll answer some questions. But go over a little bit of the landscape of Alzheimer's and dementia science and some key things that I want you to take away that are really a focus for the field right now. And then we will move into highlights in early detection and diagnosis. As Dr. Rosenberg mentioned, there's many different advances that are really pushing forward quite quickly right now in the field. And then I thought we would cover some of the latest advances in clinical trials, treatments, and even lifestyle interventions or modifiable risk factor interventions that are really underway right now. So many of you are completely aware of the impact of Alzheimer's disease and have seen some of these facts and figures before. These come out every year from the Alzheimer's Association, and they continually get updated based on more critical research happening. As you know, there's more than 5 million people living with Alzheimer's today, likely nearly 16 million Americans providing unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or other dementias. And we know that you, as certainly care providers, and in that healthcare system, are needing additional training to deal with the onslaught of individuals that may be coming to your units as coming in with complaints about memory, thinking issues, and how do you make sure that you're providing the best care? So the association, I know, as part of this care conference, is trying to help with education and resources for you all to make sure that you feel best trained. And we will continue to update that as more work comes out and more research provides evidence for best patient-centered care. One of the things I did want to bring to your attention is that there's a really striking imbalance in the amount of information that we have about individuals across genders, sex differences, racial and ethnic differences in Alzheimer's and other dementias. We know a few things. We know that almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's are women. We know that older African Americans and Hispanics are more likely than older whites to have Alzheimer's. We believe that much of this is due to health and lifestyle and socioeconomic risk factors and social determinants of health, but there's still much more research that needs to be done. And there's really a focus in the field right now on being inclusive and really striving towards more diversity in clinical trials and dementia research, because we know that this will allow for the results to be more representative of the general public. We know that we need to be able to investigate both biological differences across these diverse groups and the effects of the drug effectiveness and side effects or adverse effects that might occur due to different types of treatment. But we also need to be able to identify socioeconomic, behavioral, and cultural risk factors that are driving these diseases. The association is working across a number of different fronts with the National Institute of Health and with other collaborators to make sure that at our core, that we are focusing on diversity and inclusion of underrepresented populations in much of the research that we fund and conduct, but also really pushing the field to make sure that we're gathering more data so that we have better answers to questions about how does this affect all populations and each individual in their community. So the association really is a global research force in Alzheimer's and dementia science, and we're trying to advance research on every front by leading the research community through a number of different efforts. We just held our Alzheimer's Association International Conference, all completely virtually. We saw over 33,000 attendees at our conference this summer in July. And we're bringing those scientists together to have robust discussions about the advances that are being made. We're also advocating for innovative research, and that's really critical because it allows more research dollars to go back out into the research community, particularly here in the United States, but also around the world. We are the largest nonprofit funder of research in the world. And so this is the way that we believe that we can continue to move the needle on all of the research that's being done. And as brought up by Dr. Rosenberg, we're very excited that you actually have a new Alzheimer's Disease Research Center there in New Mexico. One of those ways that our advocacy efforts really are put to the test is when more research dollars are going back out into those research communities, like you have it in Albuquerque there in New Mexico. And with this new Exploratory Research Center, these types of centers were awarded grants because, as Dr. Rosenberg mentioned, there are new opportunities and approaches to research that haven't even been touched upon yet by researchers. And there's many specialty much specialty expertise at the ADRC there in New Mexico that will allow the research to be expanded into and diversify the research and across the education as well into new areas of the country and also into new populations, as you mentioned, as Dr. Rosenberg mentioned, Native American communities. And that's really critical because we still don't have enough information to really truly understand the impact of Alzheimer's disease and other dementias on those communities and how we can best treat and even in the future provide preventative measures as part of the healthcare process. So really exciting times for you, and we're just want to congratulate Dr. Rosenberg and all of the hard work that's going on there in New Mexico, and just happy to be a part of making sure that those research dollars continue to go back out to your centers. So I want to bridge now into some of the highlights of exciting things that we're seeing in the biomarker field and also in clinical trials. We saw recently, I would say probably over the past 15 or 20 years, that biomarker research, ways of really studying change in the human body, is really taken off for this field. The advances in technologies are almost staggering. We really started seeing changes in, I would say, the late 1990s, where we were developing new imaging tracers so that we could look into the brain of individuals that might be living with Alzheimer's disease using some of these specific tracers that are going to be picking up amyloid beta, one of the hallmark proteins that is for Alzheimer's disease in the brain. And so we're not having to wait until an autopsy to really look at the pathology within the brain to really confirm diagnosis. So we can use these types of tools to aid in the diagnostic process for physicians and clinicians that are handling many patients that are coming in with memory and thinking concerns. We are also seeing advances in biofluid analysis. As Dr. Rosenberg mentioned, we're really seeing critical, I think, validation and standardization of these types of tools, looking at cerebral spinal fluid, but also blood. And really what we want to see in a biomarker is something that's going to be not invasive, something that's cost effective, and certainly something that's reliable and standardizable on a global scale. And we want people to be able to have access to these technologies and clinicians to be able to have access to these technologies so that they can better care for their patients. We've even seen more emerging biomarkers that are growing in the field. Retinal imaging is one that's really interesting right now. I've just been in a number of different meetings with researchers really focused on, is this a tool that could be used? Is it something that's accessible? Can we see changes happening in the eye that would be predictive of changes that are happening in the brain? And certainly genetic research is really taking off in terms of how do we truly understand which genes are putting us at risk? Is it one single gene? Is it a number of different genes? Today, we don't have one single gene that really defines what Alzheimer's is. We know there are a number of risk genes. We have a few genes that we know are associated with dominantly inherited genetic mutations. But other than that, there is much more research that still needs to be done to completely define what genetic risk looks like for all individuals of different populations. But I want to touch on a few things. I want to talk about imaging and sort of biofluid analysis that's happening in the field right now. So the first study I want to mention to you is a study called the IDEAS study. This means Imaging Dementia Evidence for Amyloid Scanning. Now, you may have heard about this before. It is really one of the largest clinical trials that's ever been run for Alzheimer's disease in the world. It is a national study that was run in the United States looking at the utility of amyloid PET scans on over 18,000 Medicare beneficiaries. This clinical trial was conducted because although amyloid PET imaging tracers have been approved by the FDA for use in humans, they're not yet covered by insurance reimbursement at this time by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. So this clinical trial was designed to really look at the impact of the scan on care management plan and also the impact of the scan on major medical outcomes. That's looking at emergency room visits, falls, visits to the physician's office, trying to truly understand, does having information about amyloid in the brain help a clinician make better care decisions for their patient? We've seen some of the results from the IDEAS study published already. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from the AIM-1 of the study was that about 2/3 of the participants in this trial had a change in their diagnosis, meaning they might have been told that they have Alzheimer's disease. However, they ended up being amyloid negative on a PET scan. So that means that they have dementia or mild cognitive impairment or cognitive decline due to an unknown cause. It has to be investigated further. But we also saw patients that in this clinical trial that were actually diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease because they ended up having amyloid in their brain. So that's really giving physicians more information about what might be causing the dementia or mild cognitive impairment. We also saw that some care management as a result of this PET scans were changed. We saw that there was a change in some of the prescriptions, meaning patients that weren't on medicines that had been approved by the FDA to treat cognitive symptoms were placed on those medicines, and those that were maybe on those medicines that did not actually have amyloid in their brain were taken off those medicines. Those are the kinds of things we're looking for, and to provide evidence for this type of tool being eventually reimbursed for by insurance coverage, because we do think it would be valuable for physicians to have this and for patients to have access to it. One of the biggest things about IDEAS was that it did not include, although it was the largest study of its kind, and it still had a very large population of Black, African American, Hispanic, and Latin American participants, it still did not proportionally represent the Medicare beneficiaries that exist across our country. So there is a second study that we're now running called New Ideas. And this study is a study that's going to really try to improve precision and amyloid PET coverage in patient care. It is still unclear whether or not amyloid status is truly predictive of whether or not someone is going to go on to develop Alzheimer's disease, particularly because we don't have enough information about Black, African American, Hispanic, and Latin American individuals. We don't know how these biomarkers tell their story in all populations. And so this particular trial is going to recruit a diverse cohort of over 7,000 Medicare beneficiaries, many Black, many Hispanic, and individuals even of early onset and late onset dementia. And it will allow for typical and atypical clinical presentations of Alzheimer's disease. We will also be taking blood from the individuals for this trial and starting a biorepository so that we can compare some of the gold standard imaging results that come from the amyloid PET scans to some of the plasma biomarkers that are being developed today. So the exciting update about this is that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid actually approved the new ideas study, that this protocol can move forward and that we can start recruitment back in April. And we anticipate sort of a late fall enrollment. There's been some slowing due to COVID-19, but we certainly are very excited to see this launch. We anticipate that you may even see this in your clinical trial sites there in New Mexico. There's going to be approximately 400 sites. And we anticipate that it will probably take about 3 years of enrollment, but hoping to learn more again about the value of amyloid PET scanning for these particular individuals in the trial. Another biomarker I want to touch on is the plasma biomarkers. And we saw this year at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference that the tau in the blood, another hallmark protein in Alzheimer's disease, really may be another emerging biomarker that could be critical for us to help define who is at risk or maybe on a trajectory for developing Alzheimer's. Now, we've heard about amyloid and tau in the blood for a few years now, but particular research this year at AAIC suggested that a very specific form of tau called phosphotau 217 is very specific to Alzheimer's. And when measured in the blood is highly accurate in distinguishing Alzheimer's from other neurodegenerative disorders like frontotemporal disorder. Now we know there's different types of tau that could be a hallmark of frontotemporal disorder, but being able to differentially diagnose an individual based on these biomarkers can be critical for, again, providing accurate care, for providing differential care once the right treatments are available. So we've seen that many of these biomarkers are really telling a story about potential progression for the future of individuals that have some of these in their blood and cerebral spinal fluid. We know now that probably 2 decades, 20 years before anyone is showing clinical symptoms of Alzheimer's disease or other types of dementia, they are probably experiencing some of these changes in their blood or their brain. And while many of these blood biomarkers and cerebral spinal fluid biomarkers are still in the research stages, we're seeing a lot of progress in the field. So they're not necessarily in every doctor's office today, but we do anticipate seeing sort of a rapid progress and movement of these tests. Our goal really is to see these types of diagnostics, both CSF, PET, and blood biomarkers move through the FDA process so that they will eventually be approved as in vitro diagnostics to really help support some of the care that would be necessary in making sure that everyone is getting an accurate and early diagnosis. So let's move on to some of the therapeutics that are being developed today. So just to kind of give a brief overview, there really is a complex therapeutic discovery pipeline process that exists. We all know that it starts really with an idea in the basic research phase. This is in cells in a dish, some of small animal research, and it moves into the drug discovery phase. And this is really that drug discovery funnel that exists across all therapeutic areas for cancer, for cardiovascular disease. You've seen it right now in the news around COVID-19 clinical trials. And what you see is that discovery pipeline really tends to narrow as you move into human phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical trials. But it's not until we get through those processes, through all of those clinical trials, can a company really submit a full package to our FDA, for example, here in the United States, for sort of regulatory review of all of the safety, all of the efficacy data that exists for that particular therapeutic. And so again, there's many different clinical trials happening for Alzheimer's and all dementias, but all of them are moving through this particular type of process. We've seen, this is just some examples from the Alzheimer's drug discovery pipeline alone. This is comes from a manuscript that's published once a year by Dr. Jeffrey Cummings and his team, where they really look across the clinicaltrials.gov data set that's looking at Alzheimer's disease trials. And this was a data that really was pulled back in December of 2019, showing that there was 121 unique therapies in over 136 clinical trials to date. Now, the main effects of the treatments that are being tested in those trials are really to look at slowing down the disease progression. But some drugs are aimed at improving memory and thinking or improving some of the behavioral or psychological features or symptoms of dementia. We know that the largest number of drugs are really aimed at targeting or preventing the slowdown and loss of function in these individuals. We also have seen some significant changes in the types of drugs that are in this pipeline. There's really a growing number of drugs that are used to treat some other condition. Maybe they're being used in cancer, for example, but they might have similar mechanisms to changes that might be occurring in the brain in Alzheimer's disease. So that's what you call repurposing of therapeutics. And we're really seeing some of those drugs from other therapeutic areas moving into the Alzheimer's drug pipeline because there might be some evidence that they could be efficacious in these individuals living with Alzheimer's disease. One of the things that to me is so striking is that the total number of participants required for the currently recruiting trials is over 30,000 individuals to bring these trials to their completion. So I think it's always really critical to continue to remind people that, you know, as you are working in this field, if individuals are looking for a way to be a part of the solution, recommending that they become part of a clinical trial is one of those ways that we can really help to continue to move the needle forward. And becoming and volunteering for a clinical trial is something that's really a huge hurdle, I think, in making sure that we get enough individuals into these trials, that they stay in the trials and stay enrolled and engaged through the length and completion of those trials so that we can get the valuable data that we need to push those therapeutics forward. A couple of the trials I want to mention is that we're following quite closely is trials on Adjuvantamab, which is an anti-amyloid antibody therapy, and another trial on Pimavanc or Nuplazid, which is focused and aimed at treating dementia-related psychosis. Both of these drugs are in the FDA review process right now. In terms of Adjuvantamab, we actually saw some striking things in the field here. We know that Adjuvantamab is an anti-amyloid therapy targeting that amyloid in the brain. And it was tested in a clinical trial population of mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's and mild Alzheimer's dementia. There was a lot of surprising announcements, and this drug has had a rocky road. It was announced back in March of 2019 that there was a futility analysis that halted the clinical trials. But then it was reported, really announced back in October of 2019, that they had done an expanded data analysis. And they saw that there may be some benefits and may have been some actually significant effects of Adjuvantamab in the participants that were taking the therapeutic. In December of 2019, they reported some of these results at the Clinical Trials on Alzheimer's Disease conference. And they basically, Biogen basically announced that they had seen a reduction in clinical decline, maybe some effects on cognition and function, but also announced that there was a reduction in amyloid and tau biomarkers. And so the timeline now continues to this summer, where the FDA has now granted priority review for Adjuvantamab. That was announced in August after Biogen completed its submission. And actually just today, there was an FDA advisory committee board held by the FDA, bringing in experts from around the world to really weigh in on the both the safety and efficacy of the entire data package to get their opinion as an external review. So we anticipate a decision about Adjuvantamab by March of 2021 or sooner. In terms of drugs that are focused on behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, Pimavanc is one of those that is moving through that pipeline, as I mentioned. This is a drug made by a company called Acadia, and really this drug is already approved for Parkinson's-related psychosis. But the company is really going more towards a broader potential indication, meaning that in the phase 3 clinical trials that they conducted, they actually included individuals with dementia-related psychosis related to Alzheimer's dementia, Parkinson's dementia, Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia, and frontotemporal dementia. This drug has the potential to be the first FDA-approved psychosis drug in the dementia population. It really is the first drug to be tested in the dementia population and really focuses on preventing some of the hallucinations and delusions associated with the psychosis. We saw that the FDA granted standard review to this particular application in July of 2020, and the FDA decision is anticipated in April of 2021. So we look forward in hearing more about this. And a third drug I did just want to mention, and this is one of the first of its kind, is that there's now a new tool to treat insomnia related to mild to moderate Alzheimer's. Now, we know sleep disturbances is one of the largest, I would say, symptoms that can be experienced that are in sort of the behavioral and psychological features of dementia. And this is, again, another tool that may be a right fit for patients. The FDA first approved this tool back in February of 2020, and it is the first FDA-approved insomnia drug tested in a dementia population. So again, moving on, just to kind of circle back on other things that are happening in the field, let's talk a little bit about understanding risk. We need to continue to understand risk from all angles. We know that age, genetics, race, and ethnicity are things that you cannot change necessarily, but we know that there's other things that might be more modifiable that include environmental and lifestyle factors, cardiovascular health, and that could be driven by things like physical activity, diet, sleep, even education and traumatic brain injury, all things that may impact your risk for developing Alzheimer's or other dementia. We saw some really interesting research at our Alzheimer's Association International Conference this summer. One in particular was looking at genetics and Alzheimer's risk. We need to really better understand how genes impact Alzheimer's risk in different people. So for example, we know that Hispanics are 1.5 times more likely to develop dementia than non-Hispanic whites. However, we also understand that the ApoE4 risk gene is the strongest known predictor of Alzheimer's risk for white European descended populations. But according to this new research, this gene seems to be a less accurate predictor of risk for some Latin American populations and may differ among Hispanics of various origins. So this really suggests that testing positive for ApoE4 may not mean the same for Alzheimer's risk across all racial and ethnic groups, and we really need to continue to learn more about this. Another type of risk factor is body mass index. We saw at our conference this summer that body mass index may be more important than you think. We know that a higher body mass index between the ages now of 20 to 49 may be associated with higher late life dementia risk. Now, we haven't seen a lot of data looking at young individuals and even adolescents to really support more of a life course model for risk factors for dementia. But we're starting to see more and more research that really points to things that we may be wanting to think about earlier on in our lives. Another thing I want to touch on, and it's really prevalent right now in the news, is the impact of COVID-19 on cognition in people living with dementia. We know that most people with dementia are 65 or older, which puts them at a risk also of being infected with COVID-19 and having complications from that. We also know that many people with dementia are likely to have underlying health problems, and this can increase their risk for COVID-19 complications, meaning they're already living with cardiovascular disease in addition to dementia or even diabetes. And we're learning more and more that COVID-19 infection may actually negatively impact the brain and affect thinking and learning and cognitive skills in people with dementia. But we truly don't understand the long or even short-term impact of being, of really living through a COVID-19 infection. So the Alzheimer's Association is actually helping to lead a SARS-CoV-2 international research study to better understand the impact on the brain. There are over 25 countries now that are working together, getting also technical guidance from the World Health Organization on how to track the long-term impact of SARS-CoV-2 infection, really trying to better understand the impact on the brain, including cognition, behavior, and function. So more to come on this. And again, I just want to circle back on risk. We're learning more and more from epidemiological and observational studies that there's probably close to 40% of the population that's estimated by the Lancet, which is the Lancet Commission, which puts a report out every few years, of global dementia that may be preventable. And this year in 2020, they actually added 3 new factors: air pollution, traumatic brain injury, and excessive alcohol use to their list of things that we might want to focus on to reduce our risk. And so this is how we are learning about what may inform our risk, these types of observational studies, but we also need to translate these research findings into community-based programs. So that requires that we run interventional studies. What is the impact of reversing those risk factors? We've seen some interventional studies that have been done, and I know that Dr. Rosenberg is probably pretty familiar with some of these, being experts in the sort of vascular contributions to dementia in that particular center. But there was a study that was published, I think about a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago, called the Sprint Mind study. Now, this was really a study focused on one thing, really actively and aggressively treating blood pressure. To mostly the study trial was really looking at changing risk reduction for cardiovascular events and morbidity associated with cardiovascular events. But this trial also had a sub-study that was looking at effects on the brain. And this is the first study to ever demonstrate the reduction of new cases of cognitive impairment just by intensively controlling blood pressure to a systolic pressure of 120. It involved over 9,000 individuals that were over 50 years or older that were living at an all-cause dementia risk. These individuals did not have cognitive impairment at the time that they began the trial, but they were studied over a number of years to see if controlling their blood pressure would reduce the risk for developing mild cognitive impairment and dementia. So we saw there was a 19% significantly reduced risk for mild cognitive impairment, a 17% reduced risk that was non-significant for dementia, and a 15% reduced combined risk for MCI and dementia. There's actually a Sprint Mind 2 study that's taking place right now to follow up for longer term with the individuals of this trial to make sure that we better understand the impact on dementia and whether or not this type of approach could be something that could be implemented in the future. But from the data that we have today, we know that there are things that you could potentially be doing to reduce your risk of MCI and maybe even dementia, especially regarding cardiovascular disease risk factors. We know that there's really an immediate opportunity with life-changing impact potential that can be shared with patients and people in your community. One of the other things that we need to really understand is how do we combine some of these multi-domain lifestyle risk reduction factors together? And the Alzheimer's Association is leading a clinical trial called the US Pointer Study, standing for the US Study to Protect Brain Health Through Lifestyle Intervention to Reduce Risk. Now, this study is really a landmark study involving 2 lifestyle interventions. It's looking at a self-guided lifestyle intervention versus a structured lifestyle intervention, allowing for physical activity, nutrition, intellectual engagement, as well as health coaching. And both of these trial groups will differ slightly in format, expectations, and accountability. The individuals in these trials are coming in without cognitive impairment, but they're at risk for developing cognitive impairment because they have a family history and they may have some room to improvement in terms of their physical activity and nutrition. We also know that the individuals that are taking part in this study will have the ability to be potentially part of some of the ancillary studies. There's going to be a neuroimaging, a sleep study called Pointer Z, a microbiome study looking at changes that the intervention may cause in the gut microbiome, and also a neurovascular study that's really exciting. So a really rich resource of data will be collected from all of the volunteers that take part in this clinical trial. The clinical trial is taking place in 5 clinical trial sites around the country, involving 2,000 participants that will be recruited from about 400 per site, and 2 interventions, as I mentioned, the structured or self-guided lifestyle groups, and those participants will be randomized into the 2 groups. And the length of the study will be about 2 years. We've actually randomized about 400 participants already, so the study is underway and we're continuing to enroll every day. If these interventions prove effective, this study really will lead the way in the development of an accessible and sustainable community-based program for prevention. And we will learn so much across the diverse population that's being recruited into this clinical trial to help us better understand what those community-based programs for prevention could look like. We don't have the data yet today, but we really do hope that we could potentially develop something, whether it's not a drug or some type of lifestyle intervention that would help to delay the onset of Alzheimer's, even just by 5 years. We've estimated that you would probably prevent about 5.7 million people from developing Alzheimer's by 2050 if we had some type of treatment available in 2025. And that could have a huge impact on our communities worldwide. In summary, I know I've gone a little bit long here, but I hope you have some questions. I really hope that you continue to recognize the Alzheimer's Association as a global leader, a global force for research and dementia science. At any given moment, research is happening, learning is happening, And it's really an exciting time. There's new tools for detection and diagnosis that we've never had before. There's really a growing diversity in therapeutics that are under investigation today. And there's new resources and strategies that are being developed to promote diverse participation in research. We likely will see a future therapy for Alzheimer's that's going to include drugs, but also modifiable risk factor interventions. And that's something that needs to be evidence-based and driven by all of the research that's being conducted worldwide today. So there's much hope in research, and I want to thank you for listening, and I'm going to stop now, and hopefully we have some time for questions. Thanks for listening.
Yes, we do. We do have about 10 minutes for questions, and let me start off with one that came in early on. The question was from Sabrina in the ARDC network. Both Rochester and Jacksonville are highlighted. Please explain why. Thank you.
There are multiple centers. That one is the Mayo Clinic. They have multiple locations. So it's a group that has joined together. Most of the other centers are single.
Okay. Thank you very much. Denise, do you have some questions there?
Yes, so we do have a question in our other chat that says, which will the ideas to study include other minorities? Will it include patients with MCI, not just Latins, Hispanics, and African Americans?
Yes, so I think the goal is for recruitment is that a minimum of 2,000 Black African Americans, 2,000 Latino Hispanics, but also there's, I think, about 7,000 individuals that we're trying to enroll. So there's going to be a population of individuals, and certainly we want as many people to participate as possible in other racial and ethnic groups. To make sure that's clear, when the way that the IDEAS study is set up is that it's enrolling individuals that have mild cognitive impairment or dementia of an unknown cause. So we are looking also, the first time we did IDEAS, it really only allowed individuals who mostly had late onset Alzheimer's disease. So from an older age, 65 or older, because again, we were looking at more of a Medicare population. But for the new IDEAS study, it will allow individuals that are of younger onset. So that's another difference between the original IDEAS study and the new IDEAS study. I hope that helps.
Great, thank you.
I've got another question here. Since work with Zuni will be there, any more work with tribes? How would we start talks on that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of talk. I mean, the biggest, look, I've been in New Mexico for a long time, and it's very hard for the rural communities, not just the American Indians, but also the Hispanic, to come to a medical center, get a scan, get blood drawn, do an hour or two of neuropsychological testing, and then go back. So that was a major hurdle to getting people into studies, getting them treated properly, even diagnosed appropriately. So we were fortunate that at the university, there was a large study using mobile scanners. And this was done basically in jails to look at genetics and, of certain psychopathic people. So we took advantage of that, and we decided we would go to them. So this is a pilot study to see how it works. We're fortunate that we have Raj Shah, who's been working in the Zuni, Acoma, other tribes for 25 years on kidney disease and other impact of vascular disease on the kidney, and now he's looking at other organs. So it was kind of a natural for us to join him and look at the brain. And so he has a large population. And of course, people want us to expand it. And as soon as we get some reasonable data that this mobile approach, where we go to you or to them, works, it'll be a natural to take the mobile scanner and the team to other tribes.
Thank you.
Okay,
Denise?
so we have another question. We have a question from Michelle that says, will the Alzheimer's Association team up with WEM, Women Alzheimer's Movement, and their gender studies research?
Well, we've already done that actually. So back in, I think it started in 2013, we actually convened a think tank to really start understanding the gaps that existed related to sex and gender in Alzheimer's disease. And from there, we actually created a strategic funding opportunity through the Alzheimer's Association. And we've partnered with other organizations to make sure that that type of research is funded. And even from there, we saw changes at the NIH and the NIA funding more strategic opportunities to make sure that that type of research is focused on. So I don't know if anyone saw this, but we had, I think Dr. Maria Carrillo and I think even Maria Shriver were doing a live Instagram episode just a few weeks ago. So we definitely work with them when there's opportunity to collaborate.
Dr. Rosenberg, Valerie Sosi. Hi, Valerie. She works with Navajo Nation. She said, love that. It does help with long drives to the hospital centers. So thank you. Also, Mark Goodman, thanks Dr. Rosenberg and Dr. Edelmeier for sharing your experience and current research advancements.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening.
Any other questions out there, Denise?
None. I want to thank Dr. Knofel for fielding a few questions in the chat. Thank you for backing us up in the background, Dr. Knofel. Dr. Knofel will join us tomorrow on our closing session. So, but other than that, no other questions other than thank yous.
Yes, Dr. Rosenberg and Dr. Edelmeier, thank you so much. I mean, this was amazing today, and there's just so much going on. It's such an exciting time in the Alzheimer's world right now. But Dr. Edelmeier, I could listen to you for hours and hours, and I have at several conferences. But thank you both so much for your time and your dedication. And everybody have a great night. And you know what? There's one more check that just came in. Oh, they just said thank you all. How's that? So that's it. But thank you so much, and thanks again, UNM, for being a great partner with us. Have a great evening.
Have a wonderful night.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
Bye.